Welcome back. Well, you may remember there's utterly biblical level flooding in April and May in KwaZulu-Natal, and the huge trail of destruction there and in the Eastern Cape. Well, now there are suggestions that government acted too slowly in its response to that tragedy. The Auditor-General has released her first special report on flood relief funds. The report found that at the end of July, the government's ability to respond to the disaster was simply not adequate.
We've identified that the overall response by government to this disaster was far too slow. And when we looked even at the delivery vis-à-vis their own plans, their own expectation on how far they would have got by the end of July, there was still a significant disparity. So even by their own plans, government institutions were not able to effectively and quickly roll out these key initiatives. So we've got to figure out how we build institutional capability so that responsiveness becomes part of the system.
In the Eastern Cape in particular, the report found there was a limited response to the disaster and to previous disasters which had not been properly dealt with.
We found specifically in the Eastern Cape that there was limited response, really limited action within the province in terms of ensuring that the initiatives that were needed were actually rolled out. And what we found in the Eastern Cape, interestingly, was that there was concern that even previous disasters had not been dealt with. So they were still trying to deal with matters dating back to 2013 and really even just assessing the impact of this new disaster had not been done on time. And what that tells us is that the investment that needs to be made around capability, capacity, and responsiveness in the Eastern Cape, that investment needs to happen and happen very quickly.
Our reporter Kopano Gumbi was at that briefing. She joins us now. Kopano, good afternoon to you. I remember the most incredible cynicism that met the promise by government that, no, we're going to help people affected in the KwaZulu-Natal came so soon after the start of the pandemic and the PPE spending. So there was a decision to have a live audit, as I understand, by the Auditor-General, something we don't see that often. She seems actually quite disappointed with what government has done here.
Well, she's disappointed in the rate of change, but she's not necessarily entirely disappointed with how they've affected some of those changes. In fact, she applauded a few of the departments, not many, a few of them, in how they have actually taken the learnings from COVID-19 and all the PPE money that was misspent, and how they've applied those theories of those recommendations of hers now into the way that they've rolled out social services, and in fact applauds SASSA to say that their social relief program was so comprehensive and so well done. It actually did reach affected communities and the required people. However, and we've spoken about it a lot in Newzroom and covered it, there are still places that are struggling with water and have been struggling with water since the devastation of the floods, and she did flag that the rollout of the water tankers at the time of the flooding was quite slow, and that was the process that was a little bit misappropriated. And here she is explaining more on that.
Found that there was a delay that was experienced in actually delivering the water to the communities that needed it. There were a number of communities that identified that, or that confirmed that they went for at least one day without receiving water. That was 83% of residents that were affected. Others, as much as 3 days. And much of it, we believe is, what we found is actually associated with poor coordination between eThekwini Metro, the province, and the national department. Because what happened was the Metro had its own fleet of water tankers. Not all of those water tankers were available because of fleet management weaknesses, which really is an internal control and internal discipline issue. We found that only 62% of the water tanks that actually belonged to the Metro were available to be used.
In Kopano, there seems to be a problem with, so people needed housing, they needed accommodation, they needed it very quickly. There had been obviously intense flooding, in some places it was still raining. There was an issue around the location of this housing, where it went, what went wrong.
And that's something quite interesting that the AG flagged in presenting this report today. She said where they had identified there was a problem, the department and governments were quick to identify the need, but it is in the implementation process where they fell short very, very significantly. In this case, they found instances where the temporary houses and the mobile classrooms that had been deployed were put in the same places where the flood had just passed. And in one instance that she alluded to, there was a case where a mobile school was put on, and then the rains came back a couple of weeks later, and that mobile classroom was then again flushed away. And so she did flag that really the idea of spatial planning, how we use and allocate land, and how the department has done that in trying to get these people back into some kind of housing, definitely needs to be looked at, re-looked at, and it needs competent, capable people in the department, which is another thing she flagged that they don't have in order to execute.
I'm no expert on the geography of KwaZulu-Natal, but in my experience, limited experience, that particular part of it is very hilly. As you go into Durban, there's a reason why the N3 is like it is on that approach from Pietermaritzburg and why it's always blocked. It's because it's so hilly. There's so much going on there, which means that accommodation is a problem. There was a big conversation around building back better. She's suggesting that the better didn't happen.
That's exactly right. And in fact, some parliamentarians, even in their question and answer, flagged that with or posed that question to her to say, will the rest of your report look at how government not only identifies land for use, but also what they're spending for that land, because we know there are some concerns around procurement of land and how they spatially plan everything out. And she said, yes, we are going to look at that going forward, but it indeed is a challenge for that KwaZulu-Natal area. Many of those people are still displaced, however, and so there is an opportunity now to put them in safer, better built homes, which is another problem, again, with the build, that some of them just did not meet the specs.
Kopano, Gumbi, thanks very much indeed. Business reporter looking at the numbers, looking at the Auditor-General's report for us.